Okay, I hope you can hear me very well with this mic.
Yes, sir.
Really confident. Okay. So he has already presented me. When you go to one of our villages, the elders will call you and will tell you who you are, where do you come from, and so on and so on. So that's what I'm going to do now. My family comes from Sierra Leone. They were kidnapped there, sent to Colombia. Then from Colombia, a part of my family went to Congo, and the other part went to Spain. So I grew up in Spain. I've been living in Spain since I was 4. My father was a Spaniard. He died when I was very young. So I raised up in a black family, in an African family. Okay, so usually I present my first slide. This is the first slide I will present today at the end of the talks. But I will do it at the beginning because we know, I know the audience here has a deep knowledge of our challenges. So let's say 1,652 languages according to an official census, 5 universalist religions and hundreds of traditional religions, more than 1.4 million inhabitants, dozens of states, some with about 200 million inhabitants. So we're talking about Africa, isn't it? No. This is not Africa, this is India. That's the situation in India. That's the real situation in India. And they have a unified country. They have a single nation that's internationally respected, that's a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, has the atomic bomb, and such things that are very respectful in these days. We tend to respect them these days. Okay, this is just to introduce my speech. It is very important to remember once again that Pan-Africanism is about power. It's about action. It is not only about systems of thought, mentalities, imaginaries, social theories. Pan-Africanism first is about action, and by action it accomplishes its goals, not only by talking. By action we mean taking the power, managing the power structures, and even building the needed power structures with the objective of empowering the African communities in Africa and in the diasporas. We know about social movements based on cultural strategies. Most cultural African movements, such as the Negritude, did not have a specific plan to overthrow colonial power and economic structures. They developed their ontological approach within the frame of colonialism itself. That is why they are demanding equality, or in a more disturbing way, they are demanding to be considered as humans. This is a map of some of the cultural and political movements of liberation we had in Africa and in the diasporas. And we tend to believe that all those fit into Pan-Africanism, and it's not true. Some may fit in some aspects, others will not fit at all. For instance, let's take the Black Panthers movement. Yes, they went to Pan-African conferences and they were talking about Pan-African issues, but they were not Pan-Africanists. Okay? They were black nationalists concentrated in diaspora and more specifically in the United States, and they were Maoist. So let's bear in mind all this, because we can be confused about what Pan-Africanism is and what it's not. Unfortunately, I don't have time to discuss all this because it's too complex, but we have different colors, meaning different tendencies. We have from the Marxist, socialist, communist tendencies, to the Christian ones, to some link to the Arab world, others linked to traditionalists, etc., etc. So we have many different questions. I want to point out that Pan-Africanism is an fully anti-racist ideology and practice. And to understand that, let me share with you what I know about anti-black racism, how it appeared in the world, And more important, why did it appear? Yes, there is a reason why it appeared. Most of what I'm about to say is contained in my doctoral thesis that I hope one day will be published in English. Unfortunately, for the moment, it's only in Spanish, so I accept proposals. I have no money, but I accept proposals. Just take into account that it's only about Spain, nothing else, and it's about 400,000 words and 1,080 pages. And it's only a tiny part of the question of the black presence in Spain.
Wow.
I'm not saying this because I want to show I work very much. No, I'm just putting this on the table just to know the complexities of the issue. So, who invented racism? We tend to believe racism is a European invention. Some of us had the information that it was created around 250 years ago in Europe and the north of Abya Yala. Abya Yala is the non-Eurocentric denomination of America. But this is only scientific racism. In Spanish, we call it pseudo-scientific racism. O sea, pseudo-científico, racismo pseudo-científico. Others have the information that it was created by Christians in Spain 500 years ago with the expulsion of Amazites called Moors, and then transplanted into Abya Yala with the invasion of Christopher Columbus. And yes, this is what we call religious racism. A form of racism based in the idea of contaminated races, contaminated bloods. Some few scholars believe racism always existed in Europe, in the European culture. At least they argue you can trace its roots to classical Greece. I disagree. Although you will find different opinions over the Ethiopians in some Greek authors, there is no consensus on the existence of a structured set of ideas and practices that could be named racism as we know it. Let me share this text with you. I will read it. It says, or somebody with a beautiful sounding voice can read it for me.
As for the land of those on the other side, living from near and beyond the
yes.
line to the limits of the world inhabited by the south, the long presence of the sun at the zenith makes the air warm and subtle atmosphere. Therefore, temperate of these people is ardent, his humour fierce, its colour black, his hair curly. The same reason causes them to have neither mastery of themselves nor firmness of mind, or dominion over volubility, foolishness, or ignorance. Such are the Negroes who live at the ends of the country of Ethiopia, the Nubians.
Thank you very much, sister. And the second text, can you?
It is true that the majority of blacks are easily habituated to servitude, that this provision results, as we have said before, from an inferiority form of organization which brings them closer to the brute animals.
Okay, this text, horrendous text, that talks about everything we know about racism is concentrated in those paragraphs. Were they written by Europeans, such as Comte or any of the philosophers, European philosophers? No. They weren't. No, they weren't. They were written by Arab scholars. Arab scholars. Arab scholars. I just posed two examples, but there are many more. There are many more. But these two scholars were very, very influential in Arab world at those days. I use a non-Eurocentric form of dating, yes, but you just have to remove the first one to understand the date, the data I'm talking about. So that was the year 1150, and this is the year 1359. And then you have Ibn Khaldun.
Yeah, big guy, big gun.
And he was a North African. He was not born in in the Arabic Peninsula. He was a North African, light-skinned North African. So, what happens? This racism is seen in Arab literary works also. Criticism of the black people who hold positions of power. Such are the insults of a poet named Mutanabi against Abu al-Minsk, named Kafur, a black enslaved man, an eunuch, who was the vizier of Egypt, so the governor of Egypt. We can also see the racist contempt of the poet Abu Jafar towards the statesman Abu Said Uthman, the black governor of Granada and Malaga. That poet, that light-skinned poet, was in love to a white Arab woman, if we can say white, that was in love with Abu Said Uthman, and in one of his poems he says, "What do you see in a slave like him? I can go to the market and buy a better one for you at any moment." And this is one of the most recognized poets in the Arab world. The fact is that we find nothing similar in the Christian authors of his time. I've been doing this research for 15 years, so believe me. Yes, sometimes there are derogatory judgments and diabolization of the black body. Yes, it exists. But we see nothing related to capacities and no connection between being African and being a slave. There's no connection. There is an old racism that arose in the Arabized environment that developed much more earlier than Catholic Christian racism, and which produces evolutionary biological racism. A quick question arises from this observation. Why does the racism of Arab authors appear around these dates, I mean the first one, and not before? It must be remembered that these racist theories contradict the Quran itself, which in various passages is explicitly anti-racist. This makes these authors, who claim to be Muslim, highly contradictory. Is there any cause-effect between anti-black racism in the Arab culture and environment? Yes, we know the Arabs had a continuous and direct relationship with black victims of enslavement, much more intense than to that of the Christians of their own time. This racism that appears around 900 or 1000 years ago, it is coincidental with the peak of the Arab enslavement of black victims that led to numerous revolts in present-day Iraq, the Zanj revolts. Hope you have heard about this revolt. Very important in our history. 1 million casualties and a 40-year revolt in Iraq of enslaved blacks. Then, I can easily state that comparing Arab racism with European racism, both have in common the connection with the enslavement of black populations. In fact, you can even find Arab racism directed towards the Northern and West Europeans, as they were also their victims of slavery. So some of these statements, you can find them talking about blonde people with blue eyes. I didn't bring the examples because there's no time. But that was because also these people were the victims of the enslavement. To the contrary, Christians of Germanic origin, of course we are aware of the big difference between Arab racism and Christian racism, as the Quran, which is the law of laws, prevents any racist attitude and makes racism illegal in the Muslim world. This doesn't mean it's not working, but it's illegal, supposedly illegal. To the contrary, Christians of Germanic origin, the Goths that were ruling Spain at the moment of the Muslim entrance, created the system of purity of blood, which excluded Moors, blacks, so-called mulattoes, you know that derogatory word, Jews, and gypsies from participating in any structure of power and knowledge. That was the first apartheid project of history as we know it. But what I want to point out is that we must understand that racism does not predate our deprived situation, but is an explanation for that situation and a tool for keeping us deprived. This is what I mean by saying that there is a reason for racism. The reason for the existence of racism is that and has been our disempowered position. And therefore, Pan-Africanism as an empowering theory and practice is anti-racist. Politically, economically, and culturally, is an anti-racist tool because it empowers us. The Pan-African state, then, is a concept meant to be our tool to be stronger, not to be deprived by other peoples. I just consider true Pan-Africanisms those conceptions based on inclusiveness. As an African, if you put Africa and Africans, no matter how they are, in the center of your thoughts and aspirations, then you are a Pan-Africanist. Then I'm a Pan-Africanist because I can be considered brother by all true Pan-Africanists, despite my skin tone. Because this skin tone can be seen as alien in Europe as in Africa. I experimented that. I'm a Pan-Africanist because you don't need to be born in Africa to be proudly African. I'm a Pan-Africanist because a relatively light-skinned North African like Gaddafi can be considered Pan-Africanist as Sekou Touré, for instance. The Pan-Africanism I embrace is wide open to diversities, locations, and ideas. It is about where and who do you share your aspirations with. We must be very smart understanding why is it that Pan-Africanism is today a minoritarian ideology. Yes, it is minoritarian. Just go to Africa and talk about Pan-Africanism there. We must look at our errors and repair them. So we must be wise and have a strategy that will operate efficiently. Apart from strategic resistance, what makes us brothers and sisters? It is the tyrant torturing and killing to keep the power in a colonial state, my brother. This is why Pan-Africanism in Africa and in the diaspora is so differently perceived. Many will see in Europe or Abya Yala that the race is enough. Don't tell this to a bube in Equatorial Guinea trying to deal with the oppression of a fan-centric state. Don't tell this to the youth abandoning the continent because of dictator rules. I know they are controlled by the United States and Europe, but they don't really have that image. Let me tell you that unless a vast majority of the African continent inhabitants embrace the idea of Pan-Africanism, there will not be any Pan-African success. And for most of Africans living in Africa, except those living in the limits of the European or Arab world with their racist theories, it is not enough to be black to be solidarian to other Africans. Because in Africa, to be black is fortunately the common thing. And there are many other questions to address in Africa to reach social justice, unity, and empowerment. That's what we need. Okay, so taking account of these questions, I consider culture very, very, very important. Very important. And why is culture so important? Let me tell you this. When we ask for something, it's from the bottom. When we demand something, it's from outside. When we create something, it's from inside, from the center, from the top. We don't want to demand. We want to create a structure, strong structure, that will protect us. The following slides seem to be copied from the brother here. Believe me, it was done before your presentation. That makes this more serious because we are coincidental.
That's right.
Coincidental. Let's get a little deeper into culture. What is culture? There are several dimensions of culture. I'm not going to define culture because there are many definitions, but I'm going to talk of different aspects of culture. So there is a how do you pronounce spatial dimension of culture, which is your individual culture, which is made of your choices, the choices you can make, of course. Then there is a close environment, which is family and close relatives, friends. So then there is the nation, even if it's a recognized state or not. Then you have, for our purposes, the continental Africa. And then you have the universal defined by who, blah, blah, blah. Then you have here the fallacy of the universalism. Universalism is false, what they told us about in universalism. There is a pretended universal culture, which in fact is the hypertrophy of Western culture, which is predating the other cultures. And there are only little spaces for originality in those cultures at this moment, 21st century. Most cultures, and also, of course, there are connections between different groups, but at the end, Europe and the Western world is at the top. There is an ideal universalism that never existed in the world. And I don't think it will exist in the following 2,300 years, 3,000 years. I don't know, but I don't think so. But would be the real interchange of cultures, and some of them respecting their own spaces, and then sharing part of their culture and keeping the other one. Okay, this is impossible, okay? Let's forget about this. This will never exist. But Europeans tend to make us believe that this is the reality. Okay? We have also the aspects of ideology that, this is why I'm very coincidental with the brother. Ideologies and narratives, material culture, which is objects you can see, institutions regulating cultural practices, and social practices that are not institutionalized. And then, just to see a little bit of the complexity of the question, you can see I've divided those aspects in different sub-items. You have ideology and narratives, you have the spoken language, the names, you have the written and oral literature, historical and social common explanatory narratives. That is very important. That is what creates a nation. You must have a narrative of who you are as people and where do you want to go. And there must be a consensus over that narrative, even if it's not really 100% exact or true or whatever. If you look at Europeans, they have their own narrative. Civilization started in Greece, blah, 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 blah. Then you have democracy, Greece were democrats, blah, 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 blah. Then Rome take all those values and spread it to the world, blah, 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 blah. Fake. But they believe it. They truly believe it.
And they act upon it.
From the age of 4, 5, 6, a child has this program in his mind. White child, black child, living in the Western world, or living in Africa. We have this program in mind. The beginning of life till you have 9 years is the most important time to program somebody. It's very effective to do it through education at that age. So when we talk about our alienated brothers and sisters, blah, 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 we must understand that education is the key for that. It's not only about social media, internet, television, but it's primarily is about education. Then you have the ethics and aspirations. Many other brothers have talked about that. I'm not going to go too deep on that. Then you have the philosophy and beliefs, religion, etc. Talking about social practices, you have an idealized family structure, which in Africa tend to be big family. Education, how do you educate the next generations, the following generations? Laws, social rules, politics. Then you have celebrations. Most celebrations have are in relation to a historical fact and the interpretation of that historical fact. Whether if it's true or not true, those celebrations tend to strengthen a society. Then in Spain they have the so-called discovery of America. And it's the national celebration. It's the national celebration. 12th of October. That was the day the rapper and murderer Christopher Columbus put his foot in Abiyala. And they celebrated. It's a holiday. Children do not go to school that day. You celebrate it. The genocide. You celebrate it. That makes them strong. And that makes them believe, okay, that was not that genocide. We are celebrating it. Come and join us. Then you have economy rules and practices. Not all economy rules and all economy practices are the same. They vary between cultures and so on. And there are specific ways of organizing goods and food production and so on. Then you have the material culture, which is very easy to explain. They are objects. Then you have objects, which are, in the material culture you have something that most people tend to forget, which is the energy production and consumption. There are many forms of traditional doing this, and that makes a change on what kind of society you have. For instance, we are in a petrol-centric society right now. So that creates specific conditions around the world because of that. Then you have the technology and tools, architecture and shelter, engineering, building and waste, and then you have the art and leisure products, body aesthetics, clothing, music and dance, cinema and theater, toys, games, food consumption, etc. I would call this, what I'm going to explain now, the theory of 60-40. 60-40, okay? Let me read this first. Culture is about creating. Creating makes you original. Originality has an enormous value and makes you the center and not the periphery of a nation. Pan-Africanism has been known in the field of politics, yet we know the enormous task still to accomplish. We now have formal independencies and national and even continental structures, although still controlled by Western powers. This victory is very little and partial, yet there have been absolutely no global victories in the fields of economics and culture in Africa. None. The proposals for economic Pan-Africanism vary too much from a range of options, from the ultra-capitalism of some proud African entrepreneurs, or the petty capitalism of the black-owned businesses, to the Ujamaa of Nyerere, or the communalism of Du Bois. Let me share with you that we must say Du Bois, not Du Bois. Du Bois. He was very upset when people said Du Bois. Or politically, from the emancipatory imperialism of the Rastafarians, or the monarchies and kingdoms that confronted colonialism, to the scientific socialism of Nkrumah. most of all these theories have failed in Africa. All have failed. You may say that Western operations had those theories to fail. Okay, I agree at a certain degree. And in the field of culture, there are various identitarian-oriented Pan-Africanisms based on different issues. For instance, in religious terms, you will find African traditionalists, followers of Kemetism, and also you'll find Christians like Gavi or Kruma, sorry to say it, he's Christian, or Haile Selassie, or followers of Islam like Malcolm X. He was a black nationalist, much more than a Pan-Africanist, but I'll mention him. Or Sekou Touré was a strong Pan-Africanist. Or Gaddafi. He was so Pan-Africanist that Westerners killed him, even though he was a Muslim. So little has been said in the field of languages. I think Ngugi wa Thiong'o has a lot of interesting words to say on this. I'm not going to go beyond that, but those languages, you know, in Africa, we still people still calls them dialects.
Vernacular.
You can talk of scientific socialism and make it fit with traditional African economics, but you must conclude, if you are honest, that the so-called scientific socialism is an European invention.
Yes, sir.
Based on European conditions.
Yes, sir.
After a history of labor coming out of European Industrial Revolution.
Yes, sir.
Out of the accumulation of capital from slavery.
Yes, sir. Correct.
That's it.
Yeah, go on.
We didn't have those conditions in Africa. Except in few areas like South African cities or some Kenyan cities. Or some cities in the north of Africa, not generally. Yet you must recognize the enormous difficulty to match socialism with the traditional economic systems of the African monarchies, for example. They do not match. They do not match, believe me. I guess the attitude towards the African emancipation and improvement of our structures, despite so many problems we face in Africa, is based only in one thing at the moment. As an African, if you put Africa and Africans in the center of your thoughts and aspirations, then you are a Pan-Africanist. We have little more to say we are Pan-Africanists. So culture is very important to reorder all this. One must understand that people tend to see military victories as favors of God, not favors of fortune. So when the Christians enslaved black Africans and were victorious over Moors, it meant for them that God had decided that they must be superior. This was also the perspective of the Arabs, of the other black people. So, oh my God, okay, okay. Then if they defeat you, your blood, your appearance, or whatsoever will be considered inferior. Let us not be defeated again. That's the key point, not to be defeated. Gods give the victory, as they say. So, gods is being part of the culture, of the beliefs of a nation, of a people. That is why culture, it is very important. I'm going to finish in 2 minutes, sorry. We had the idea in mind that Krugman gave us. Take the political reign and all the rest will be given, more or less. It was not like this. Sadly, it was not like this.
True.
If you are mentally colonized and you take the power, you will give all your resources to the European master. In fact, you will never really take the power. for the good of the people if you are European-oriented mind. Because you will reproduce the schema of dependency over the West. So it's the lack of an African-oriented political class which prevents African-oriented countries to arouse. Thus, the inexistence of a Pan-African cultural design prevents the creation of a powerful, independent Pan-African state. So, just finish with it. We need a strategy for the implementation of Pan-Africanism. When the Arabs conquered part of the world, when Genghis Khan conquered part of the world, and when Christians conquered half of the world, they already had a culture.
That's right.
They didn't think in the way that when we get the power we will have a culture. No. They had a culture and they expanded.
Good point.
And they expanded. And that's what makes them very self-confident to do what they did. So what we need is to rebuild, reconstruct everything that is African and to practice it in a very daily basis. In a very daily basis. We have different levels. We must think of these different levels. What can I do for the African culture in my personal level? What can I do in the social level? What can I do in the national level? And what can we do in the African level? And we must be wise. We need symbols. We need consensus of a language, a Pan-African language. This doesn't mean that we are going to erase or eliminate our diversity. No, I don't want that. But we need a consensus of using one language. I'm speaking to you in English. I don't like it. It's a colonial language.
That was it, yeah.
Okay, just the final slide. That was Africa before. That is Africa now. We must talk about this. We must go back to this. Unless they will have won the battle. They will have won the battle. Unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. And just because I'm run out of time, just say that cultures matter. Pan-Africanism is strength and in unity and respect for diversity. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That was amazing. And this is it. We want to massively thank you all for being here with us for the past 3 days. Your contributions and everything you have done has been amazing and encouraging. So I just want you to know, if you have any other suggestions as to how things you thought things should have been done differently, please email the organizers. Yeah. He doesn't like to be praised too much, so but he's done so well. Now, question time. Just please, we're tired, so be brief.
Yeah. My name is Sylvester. Yeah. I just would like to say something that you all are going to be upset about right now. Let me say good. I can't speak the facts. Now we must realize that Christopher Columbus did discover the West Indies and America. You agree? You know why? Why is it that? He did discover it for the European, not for us. We are thinking of it in a European mentality. That's why we keep saying, oh, he didn't do that. It did. But it's for the European. Okay, you got a question? Yeah, it's for the European. It's not for us. It's not for us as African. And another thing again, it says.
You have a question?
No, just make a statement. No. Well, I had to say it. So again, all right.
Thank you. Thank you. Question, please. Let's be be fair and nice to each other, okay? Question.
I have a question, not a statement, I thought, because I know the difference. And I'm asking a question, I hope Dr. Nana will add on the answers. In the 70s, we realized that there were a lot of African leaders with real emancipatory political ideologies for the development of Africa. Have Africa stopped born such children?
What happened?
My name is Sam. I just wanted to know, because 80% of African leaders are educated in Europe. And these people are supposed to carry the Pan-Africanism in quotes when they get to power. So how do we reorganize the system again when you have these political leaders still in place?
Last one.
My question is this. Towards colonial freedom, which one of the brothers here from Cameroon talked about, Nkrumah made clear distinction between two types of Pan-Africanism. He talked about the Pan-Africanism of African people self-determinedly unifying to emancipate and rebuild Africa. And that was the Pan-Africanism he subscribed to and tried to practice all his life and recommended. But he also won, that was in that little book, Towards Colonial Freedom, written here in London before he left, right, in London, where we talked about the Pan-Africanism of John Smuts. John Smuts was a British general in South Africa, right, whose idea was that of unifying Africa for the purposes of Europe. You know, at the end of this, virtually at the end of this, you know, would we say that we have been able to distinguish between the Pan-Africanism of African people and the Pan-Africanism of what I said, our enemy?
Okay. I will start with the last question.
Good question, Steve.
Because it's very, very, very important.
Yes, yes.
That's why I say we need a culture. We need a Pan-African culture for us to distinguish who is our brother and our sister and who is not. There are many black brothers westernized over there that will destroy us. Yeah. Somebody talk about fighting with only one hand. So we need a cultural validation to know if somebody is African oriented or not. So once we have this, let's go and build the building. You cannot build the building without having, what do you call it, the planning of it. Okay? So as I said before, most powerful cultures that made history is because they had a culture first and then they expanded. Then in Africa we have, of course, similarities along the continent. But we must make it clear for new generations that this is African culture. And to teach to our children, this is African culture, this is our history. Even if I'm not telling you the history totally perfectly as it has to be, this is what we believe. Once you have this, then you have the potential to build an African state, African center. Then there was a question about Christopher Columbus and the discovery, the so-called discovery. I've heard this from many white scholars in Spain, saying that no, he was talking about from our perspective. Let me tell you something. Christopher Columbus, he had only one perspective, and he thought he was the universal perspective. And till now, in the 60s, that they make us believe that what was the universal perspective. And the inhabitants of Abya Yala were not considered even fully humans. So that's why they could say discover. If they go to an island and say, I discovered this, because the people here, they are like cows, they are like monkeys or whatever. Then I can put a name to this continent, or I will call it America, or call it, I can put a name to things, because things have no name because there's no people there. That's the sense of discovery I'm excited. I'm criticizing that sense of
Capitalist. In the same way the capitalists.
Please.
I would love to have a talk to you later if you want.
Yeah, we'll talk after.
We don't have time. Yes. Sorry. I forgot someone. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Remind me a little.
Yeah, I was saying that 98% of them
Yes, that's the problem of education. So we must build institutions for culture. We cannot only say, I like to speak Swahili, I go to an internet course, and I learn Swahili, Ujambo, all that.
No, yeah.
You must have a Swahili powerful and strong school.
Revolutionary.
Our children.
Yeah.
Then, for most parents, there is a choice in education, saying, okay, if I put my child in this school, he will succeed. If I put my child in this school, he will fail. So many African parents that are very, let's say even African traditionalists, they go and put their child in the English school. Because they perceive that will be successful for them, they will have more contacts, they will learn more, whatever. So let's build powerful Swahili schools that will make the parents think that, okay, if I put my child there, he will succeed in life. So that's very important. That's very important. And there was another one, you know, English, sorry, my memory is off. There was another question.
Yeah, the question was about leadership. African political leadership.
Sorry.
That is working. I love how people are funny. That's so funny.
In the 70s.
I remember. What has happened? We know there was a strategy in the independence. The rulers said, okay, give them independence. There are more modern ways to control them.
That's right.
More clever ways to control them. We don't need to be ruling the country inside. We just can rule from our house. It would be more safe for us. It will be safer for us. So let's keep the industrial network that benefits us. Take the brains, give them to Europe, program them constantly, and you will continue being the master. Let me tell you a sad story about slavery. I know the slavery issue very well. In the slavery, in a good, in a well-arranged slavery plantation, the master does not have to be there. He doesn't have to be there.
True.
Many of them were living in Europe, creating the revolution, the
French Revolution,
the Enlightenment, and so these ideas, they were in Europe. And there was no internet at that time. They were doing just through letters because they had people there, even many of them, they were Africans too, controlling the situation. And that's the situation we have now. That's the situation we have now. So we must break this. How do we break this? Creating a conscience, as has been said before, through a specific African culture that we can follow. You can say I'm African, okay, I'm a Yoruba, I'm an Ashanti, and this and that. No, let's create a Pan-African culture we can embrace. Apart from our local cultures. A Pan-African culture we can embrace. So that would make us powerful. Arabs had the Arab language, they had the Quran. Christians had the Bible. They have the Bible is a story that develops in the Middle West. In the Middle East, sorry. And it's about brown and black people. They transform it into a white thing and make us believe that it was a white tail. So, but to do that, they first had to believe that. They had to believe in that narrative for us to believe in this. So we need to believe in one narrative, specific Pan-African narrative. Thank you very much.
Come on, let's give it. Just a quick one. There is Kwanzaa cards and books outside if you want to.